Have you ever wondered what goes through a parent's mind when their kid is considering a gap year? On today's episode, I talk with Lynn, mother of two daughters, one who has completed a gap year and one they're going to be advocating for to take a gap year. And she talks about the decision-making process, what it was like to be on the gap year, and all of the ways that her daughter evolved and changed over the course of her gap year, and what it was like for her to re-enter back into post-secondary. Take a listen. Welcome to the Gap Year Podcast, where we explore the who, what, where, when, and why of gap years. It's real people sharing their stories, ideas, and experts diving deep into how you can make the right decisions in order to have a meaningful gap year. This is the place to be no matter where you are on your gap year journey. I'm Michelle Dittmer, your resident gap year expert. Let's jump right in. Welcome, everybody, to the Gap Year Podcast. I'm so excited to share with you today another parent perspective. So today we have Lynn Trevesan with us, and she's going to share a little bit about what happened with her family and her daughter on their gap year journey. So Lynn, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Happy to be here.
I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of background on your family and kind of how you ended up on this podcast today.
Sure. So let's see. The gap year is not something we had originally thought of at all. And it sort of morphed and evolved. I guess a little bit about our family. So my husband and I are both engineers. And then I'm a management consultant as well. And so I was kind of I traveled a lot, and he ended up being a stay-at-home dad for quite a few years. But through kind of our journey, we've had multiple jobs, different things. He's now a journeyman electrician. He's a mechanical engineer, did a bunch of other things. So we gave up that idea of doing one thing forever a long time ago. And started to explore a little bit above the world and take the kids on vacations. So then our two kids, we've got two girls, they are 15 and 18. And actually both are identified gifted. And my older one, she actually skipped a year. So when it came time to look at university, she was going to be 16. Her birthday is late September. So, I mean, we skipped her for the academic challenge, not because we were in any great rush to get her through schooling and then into working. You've got a whole lifetime for that. So that was the primary motivation, was because she was young. But then we started to explore and look to see what's out there, because nobody we knew anything about gap years. So it was an investigation.
Well, that's great. And thank you for stepping up and sharing your experience, because a lot of folks don't know anybody who's taken a gap year, and therefore they don't have a resource to tap into. So thank you so much for sharing your story today with all of the listeners out there. And I like that you identified that your daughter was quite young. Having skipped a grade or not skipped a grade, a lot of parents are recognizing that their children maybe need a little bit more time to just have another year of growth, another year of maturity. So no matter how academically inclined they are, sometimes a little bit more space and time to mature is going to set them up for success moving forward.
Yeah. So our youngest is 15. She's in grade 10 right now. We will highly advocate a gap year for her as well. So she did not skip a year. She's an ADD kid. She's got other challenges. And honestly, we have no idea what she wants to do. So I think that extra, once in Ontario, so it used to be the grade 13, switched to grade 12. These kids are young. So it's just one more year to figure out, maybe not exactly what you want to do, but it even helps to eliminate some of what you don't want to do. So we're happy to have her home.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, what did that process look like? Was this something you said this wasn't something that was on your radar for a long time? Was this a subject that you approached with your daughter? Did she bring that to you, or what did that conversation? How did that start?
I think it was probably me bringing it up at the beginning, and saying, I've heard of this thing called a gap year. I think they do it a fair bit in Europe. Let's see what information we can find. And Google comes into play. And we actually found a gap year, like not a workshop, but a presentation type thing, open house or something, in Halton a couple years ago. And so we were able to go and walk around and look at different vendors to say, look, there's actually companies that help organize this and can help you stay focused and stay engaged throughout this year. Let's go see what they have to offer. Um, so I think she had a couple other things that were going for her to do the gap year. So she also wanted to work. University is very expensive. She's in an engineering program at, I don't know, $11,000 tuition every 4 months. So she wanted to work and make some money. And then she's also she was involved in Air Cadets, a phenomenal program that she'd have some great opportunities to her if she stayed in the program. So there was kind of those three compelling reasons to kind of, were able to get her along the line of, well, you mean if I stay in cadets, I can get my pilot's license? Maybe that's worth delaying university. So it wasn't that hard for her to really say, yeah, you know what, I think that's a good idea. It doesn't mean she didn't miss some parts of it, but overall she, grasped the idea of it.
I think that's great. I think the fact that you did your research, that and this is something that people don't realize, that when you're picking even a university program or a post-secondary program, you do research. You spend time looking at all those guidebooks. You spend time in presentations in the high schools. You are online researching. You're looking at the different cities that these universities are hosted in. And that takes a lot of work. And people sometimes just glaze over that when it comes to the gap year pathway. They just expect it to fall into their lap. And that's not the case. There is a lot of work that goes into understanding what is possible and exploring all of the different potentials that are out there. So I'm so glad that you found one of the information sessions. In April and May of this year, we're actually running another set of sessions, and we're going coast to coast this year. Really excited, from Halifax out to Vancouver Island, 14 different stops. Make sure you check on the CanGap website if there is an opportunity close to you. And if not, we run monthly online sessions. It's a great place to kickstart that research. And the other thing that I like that you said was that you really looked at what were the things that she was already involved in, or what could she make space for that she already had on her radar that might really be appealing.
And I will say we started early. We're very much a planning family. So this was probably, I don't know if it was grade 10 or grade 11, probably, that she was in, and we started this already. Because, there's some programs out there where you can travel for 6 months, right? Like there's some amazing things out there. But she needed to start thinking about it to start solidifying in her brain exactly. So thinking about, well, what else do you want to fit in? Are you willing to give up cadets? How much money do you actually want to make to make sure everything fits? So she squeezed travel in with she did a 1 week Habitat for Humanity build in El Salvador. But for her, the priorities came to be cadets and working, and then let's fit some travel in as well. And then we did our last hurrah all family vacation in March kind of thing. I don't know when we'll get the four of us together again. So, but we did sit down with a calendar and say, okay, well, if you work from September to December, this is what you might be able to make. She was a lifeguard. She ended up doing a lifeguard full time. So it's just, what do you want to get out of it? So.
Yeah, and I like it's a great place to start. Is with what starting with the end in mind, and I like that she was able to identify some of the opportunities that she might have to give up, like looking at her cadets and the opportunities that were possible, like getting her pilot's license. Those are incredible opportunities and drawbacks, and you kind of have to weigh both sides of the coin to really figure out what the best fit is. And gap years are not for everybody, although I would argue most people would benefit from it, as you're probably experiencing looking down the pipe for your second. But I think that starting with what do you want to get out of it is a really, really great place. And the fact that she identified that financially she wanted to earn some money, the fact that she wanted to continue on with serving for air cadets, and she got her pilot's license, and squeezing in some travel. There's nothing wrong with getting out there and seeing a little bit of the world. And she did it in a volunteer capacity where she was able to give back, which I think is just a really well-rounded gap year.
And I will say one of the other things we looked into before embarking on this was, I mean, she knew what she wanted to do at university, or thought she did. I thought it might change. It didn't end up changing. But she did apply for university with her cohort. So in grade 12, she did all the applications. Our thought was that, you know what, your headspace is here. Let's do it all now. Your friends are doing it. But then specifically reached out after acceptances to say, okay, I'm planning a gap year. What does that mean? And we found that, and actually we talked to universities even before. We said, do we apply now or do we wait? Some of them said apply now. One of them said doesn't really matter. And actually the Waterloo said apply now and apply again. And depending on, because if you're not successful in this year, you might be successful the following year with your added experience from the gap year stuff. So anyway, she got in grade 12, and then it was a simple deferral. So it's like, yep, I accept you accepting me. I'll wait for a year. Thanks. And it was no problem. She kept a scholarship that she got, just an entrance scholarship that was able to port to the following year. So it took a little bit of extra work and phone calls. And I will say that universities their systems aren't necessarily set up for gap year kids. And we had to talk to a couple people before they knew what we meant. But it eventually worked out fine.
And I love hearing these stories, because I think it is wise to tap into the resources and the momentum that happens in grade 12, where everybody is on the track to apply to post-secondary. You have the support of your guidance counselor, you have some thought, and your plans may change, but there is nothing wrong with changing your mind later on down the road. And to know that a lot of universities will defer acceptance based on a gap year, I think is a really important message. But also, like you said, it's not exactly clear cut, and you do have to take the reins a little bit in that conversation and make sure you're connecting with the right people. But even in some of the most competitive programs, they will make sure that they are retaining their students. If you were smart enough this year, you're probably going to only be smarter next year. And I like the fact that Waterloo had said apply again next year, because your experience on your gap year might actually make you a stronger candidate. So I think that's so important for people to realize that you are gaining life experience, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the field that you're studying, but you are growing and maturing and learning more about the world, and that is going to make you a better student, which means you are a more desirable student to a lot of schools.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's changing. Absolutely. I expect it'll be a bit of a slow evolution, but it's coming.
Yeah, and they're open to conversations,
Yep.
and that's a really great place for us to be right now. So I'd love to learn, were there any struggles or hurdles along the way? Because like you said, a lot of her friends just continued straight on, and the gap year is a less common pathway. So were there any things that were a little bit more challenging for her, or that she came up against that you could share with our listeners?
Sure. So So I guess the university process, it was a little bit stressful, just making sure everything was going to work out fine. There was a couple scholarships that she wasn't eligible for because she wasn't graduating university and entering the following September to university. Just the way scholarships are sometimes written, that's you're no longer eligible. They weren't very big ones, and we said, you know what, pilot's license, $1,000, go for your pilot's license. It's not that big a deal, right? And then the I guess that so socially, um, September comes around, all her cohort goes off to university, and they start posting pictures and this, and we're doing this and this party and this kid's purple, and it's there was a little bit of, wow, I'm getting up at 5 o'clock to go to work and they're at school. So there was certainly a little bit at that time of just, what am I missing out on? And it's like, but you're not missing out. You're going to do it next year. Think about trying to focus on what are you gaining versus what are you missing out on. And I think, as a high school kid, your world is your high school friends. But all of us that, my experience, you went to university. I have one high school friend I keep in touch with, and, sporadically. It's your world changes and your friends change. So you were going to, trying to work her through the thought that you're going to grow away from these people anyway. It's okay that you're just growing differently this year than the rest of them. The rest of them aren't together either. They're all off doing their individual things, building their own worlds. Your world's coming. It just looks different.
I think that point there is so important to highlight for parents and for students, that when you're in high school and you're living and breathing that world, your peers are so important. And the world that you live in has been so comfortable for the last 4 years. And you really feel that this is the only way that life is ever going to be. And so to encourage them to understand how life is going to change and relationships are going to change and your perspective on the world is going to change is really important for high school students to know that that change is coming. And the flip side is also true for parents who have that world experience, who have gone beyond the world of high school, to have a little bit of empathy for what a drastic step this is in a young person's life. And not to downplay the role that peers have and the influence and the pressures and the stress that comes with shifting out of high school. So whether they're shifting into a gap year or shifting into post-secondary, this is a very turbulent and exciting time. And I just love that you were able to recognize that and have those conversations with your daughter.
I
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say, yeah, one of the things we were nervous about, but didn't end up happening, was when she eventually started school, because she'd had been a year off, not doing any kind of academics. We were worried, are you going to be able to keep up? Will you have forgotten everything you learned in calculus? But she actually did really well. And I mean, she's always had very good work habits. Her year off, honestly, she was busier than even in school. She, worked full time. She did cadets almost every weeknight, except for one night she was in a concert band. Every other weekend was cadet stuff. Like, we never saw her. I thought I would have somebody home to, help me make dinner, drive the other kid around, clean my house. My gosh, we hardly saw her for the year. But that kind of work ethic just moved right back to school. And again, we had to coach her a little bit about everybody's marks go down. But ultimately she did really well and it was fine. So we were worried about that. Turns out for no reason. So.
And I think that is one of the key pieces, especially for students who are interested in STEM, there is this fear that the knowledge will disappear, that I'll forget everything I memorized in biology class, or I'll forget all of the equations, or all of the ways to integrate. But it's not about the knowledge; it's about the skills and the work habits, as you were saying, and the knowledge and the skills will reappear as you just flex those muscles. And it's like riding a bike. You know how to do it, and the first little bit you might be a little bit shaky, but before long you are away to the races, and it's like you never stopped. And I think another thing that's really interesting with students who return back is they go back with a different perspective. Having not been a student for a year, you often have a different appreciation for what it means to be a student. You just have a different perspective and a different understanding of why education might be important. I'm not sure if that was something that you experienced at all.
I, I think the I think a piece of it was she's always just been a very mature kid. But even the act of working for the year and funding much of her education herself, um, she values it. She'll tell me about some kids. It's like, Mom, they don't show up for class. How do you not show up for class? Do you know how much a class worth is? So it's just, I think it just gives them that much ownership that, you know what, and I asked even, we were 6 months through the gap year or whatever it was. It's like, okay, have you applied to the right program? Are you sure this is what you want to do? It's not too late to change it. She's no, I think that is still what I want to do. Okay, good. Right. So, they're making active decisions about where they want to be and, is it the right thing? So, I mean, she certainly learned that, wow, because, I don't want to be a lifeguard forever. Mom, there's people there that are lifeguards and they've been doing it for 30 years. I don't want that. It's like, okay.
Yeah. And some parents come to me and they say, well, my kid's going to get a taste of money, and they're going to figure out that they could just work and just have money, because as a
Interesting.
student, you've never had that. And so I always giggle a little bit, because often it's the opposite, that they realize there is value in money, and there is value in it, not only in terms of what they can afford by having it, but also that they can have higher wages if they have some further education in whatever regards that looks like. So I think it's really neat that you bring up that perspective, that she knows now the value of the education, from the dollars and cents, but also from the future career path.
Yep, absolutely.
I love it. Um, if you could boil it down to a couple things that she gained, in terms of skills over the course of this year, and not necessarily like the tangible things like the pilot's license, or the dollars that came into the bank account, but what are some of the skills you think that she developed that she wouldn't have necessarily developed if she had gone straight into post-secondary?
So she called me the other day to say, Mom, guess what I just did? I was like, what? I phoned, she's doing her Duke of Ed. I phoned XYZ company about this. And like, that was just a major milestone because Michaela hates being on the phone. She hates calling, people that she thinks, authority figures or whatever. So I think that year we saw a lot of growth just in the maturity of, she had a full-time job, she had bosses, she needed to go out and organize a few things herself, and we stepped back. It's like, you know what, it's your thing. If you're going to do it, you've got to do it. So she's really gained that confidence of just being a bit of an advocate. Going to she's covered under our health plan, so go and figure out what you need to do to get that $300 back from Waterloo's health insurance, whatever. There was forms and people to talk to, and she did it, right? So it's just, I think that, ability and maturity to go out and start to advocate for yourself.
I think that's great. And I often use the analogy of stepping into the driver's seat of your own life. And I think that this is a really good example of this, that she realized that she had control of her life and there were things that she needed to actively do as the driver. She's not a passenger in her own life. She's stepping into that driver's seat. She's choosing where to go. She's choosing how fast to go. She's choosing which lane to be in. And I think as parents, that's what we want for our kids. We want to launch them into successful adulthood. And it sounds like she gained a lot of those skills and a lot of direction in terms of moving herself forward.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. Now, from a parent's perspective, if you could speak directly to other parents out there, what would you say in terms of identifying if a gap year is the right thing for their kid? Is there anything from your experience that you would share with them in looking at their own children? What might they want to be looking out for?
I think the student needs to have a plan for what they want to do, right? So even my youngest, who would be happy to sit at home for a year and play video games, yeah, that's not an option. It's if you're going to do this extra year, know what the plan is, know what you hope to achieve at the end of it. Like, what is your why behind doing that extra year? Because they are so young, you know, do they have a passion about whatever program, what it is that they're going to be doing? So I guess observation, of my 6 nieces and nephews, 2 of them started and then quit in the first year, or struggled through, and then actually they went to university right away. Then they took a year off, and then they went back to university, because they hadn't found the right fit yet. And that's where I see it with my younger one. Is I don't think she's going to know exactly what she wants to do yet. So being able to just explore a few more things. Also maturity. I mean, I will say campus has changed a lot, but is your child, mature enough to handle being alone, being on their own, and able to make the decisions that they're going to need to make to keep them safe and to keep them, progressing. Even if my oldest had gone to university at 16, I wouldn't have been worried about her being able to look after herself. She's a very mature kid. She would have been fine in that context. I think friendships would have been a little more challenging just because of the age. But my younger one, it scares me to think I'm sending her off into the great unknown,
Mhm.
just because they're younger. I think she's always needed a little more support, and I think an extra year of support will help.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to underscore a couple things that you said there. Number one is having the first thing you talked about was having a plan of what to do on your gap year. And I can't stress how important that is. And a lot of parents have the fear that you mentioned of sitting on the couch playing video games or sitting on the computer for the entire year. And it can take some effort to get started on that process. So if you are independent and you like doing your research, just spend the time doing it. If you do need a little bit more support, we have an online gap year planning toolkit that will take you through the process step by step. So everything from understanding why you're taking a gap year, to setting goals for the year, to budgeting, to putting together a year's worth of activities for your gap year. So if you do need a little bit of support, we do have that as a resource available to you. And the other thing that you mentioned was looking at your nieces and nephews and how many of them had kind of hurried their way into post-secondary only to a year later decide that they maybe needed a little bit of a break to actually get on the right track. And this is something that's really common. I would estimate about 30% of the people who reach out to the Canadian Gap Year Association are actually coming after an attempt at post-secondary, whether it's after first semester or first year, and they're looking to figure out what their plan B was because plan A was not the right thing for them. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I think it's important for people to know what the consequence could be if you are pushing people to go faster than they're ready for. So being able to identify if you are passionate, like you said, or you are interested at the very least in what you're going to study is a really, really important piece, because those that come to us after making an attempt sometimes feel that they're not smart enough for university or whatever program they were in. And that's not, in fact, often the case. Maybe it's just the wrong fit, or maybe it's a piece of maturity. And if they had just delayed 1 year, they could have grown and learned and changed enough that they would have been successful in the first year. So thank you for sharing those pieces. It's so important that people hear those stories, and to know that the ratio is pretty high in your family, and pretty much across the board of folks who make an attempt and then make a little bit of a U-turn and readjust.
And I think again, as the gap year gets more accepted, there will be other people out there to talk to, which I think this podcast is it's fabulous. And the information sessions where you can go out and talk to other families that have either done it or are considering doing it, because the crazy looks we got from my parents and my husband's, family is just, you're going to let her do what? Why are you doing that? And but don't you think? And it's so you do have to put up with resistance. We figured out a long time ago that we know our children best, and it doesn't really matter what some others might think. So you take that opportunity to do some education, and then you sit back and just say, yeah, just watch her be successful. But you do need a bit of a thick skin and get armed with the education to sometimes defend your choice. But honestly, it's your choice. It's your kid's choice. It's nobody else's choice.
I love that. And the word that I use when I talk about this element is you need to have an element of boldness, because it's not confidence necessarily, but you need to be prepared that you're doing something different. You're doing something bold by defying the norm that
Yep.
most people are doing. And that goes for the young person, but it also goes for the parents, because those water cooler conversations or the PTA or at the office, whatever it might be, when everybody is talking about their kid and what their kid is doing next year, when you step up and proudly say, my kid is taking a gap year, you get one of two responses. For people who have seen the light, they say, oh man, I wish my kid had taken a gap year. Or you get the, well, what's wrong? Did they not get in somewhere?
Yeah, exactly.
Is there something going on that we need to support you in? And to be able to stand up and confidently say, no, this is an active choice and this is going to be good for my kid, I think it requires a level of boldness. So I'm so glad you brought that up. I don't think that it's an obstacle that should get in the way, but we are social creatures, and the fear of what other people are going to think is a big influencer. And just being armed and ready with the language to speak about your decision and to back it up, or to just move on. If they
Just
don't get it, they don't get it. So I think that's great that you had that boldness and your family had that boldness to stand behind your decision. And I bet when everybody is looking back on it, and some of those people who might be doubting, in a couple of years, they'll look back and they'll really be able to see what a positive decision it was for you and your family.
and I think it's that, you know, kids are in a rush, right? Everybody's in such a rush to graduate, to get to go to school, to get a job, to move on. And I think, you know, this is, you know, it took that maturity and, 40 years later to say, why on earth were we hurrying? What are we rushing for? So it's, and I think but it's a mindset shift that is working its way through. And then it's trying to educate others to say, it's an extra year. Think of all the fabulous things you can do with that year. Think about the travel I wish I had done before I had kids, because boy, when they're little, it's hard to travel, right? So it's just that, it's that big shift of that. And I think it's a bigger, even just economy shift around, why are we working so hard so fast to earn so much, to spend it on what? To spend it on lifestyle? Well, Let's match lifestyle with the process. Take vacations during, not when you retire. um, I think it's all part of the same thing.
Yeah, there is definitely a culture shift in the air. It's not quite taken hold yet, but the gap year pathway fits within that idea of slowing down, this narrative of self-care that's coming up, or living life for the sake of living life, and um, working to live, not living to work. And all of these narratives are circling around. And I think it's a real gift that we can give our children if we start to have that conversation with them when they're younger, so that they can embody that joie de vivre that we have lost as we are pursuing success in different ways. So I think that you are right on the money when it comes to this idea of slowing down and acknowledging what is the rush, what is going to happen in 12 months that you will gain from this experience, or what will you lose out on that you can't do 12 months from now. And I think that that is important for families to hear, that even though they might be missing out on Frosh Week this year, when they return back to school, there is going to be a Frosh Week, and they will have an incredible time there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, speaking of slowing down, it's time to wind up this incredible conversation. Lynn, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and your family's journey. I think it's important that people realize how many families are on this journey, and you shared some really incredible tips on what families should be thinking about and some of the benefits that they might get. So, thank you so much for joining me.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
I absolutely love talking to parents. It's such a great combination of support and love for their kid and exploration of what their future holds. And it's just such a beautiful conversation. And I really wanted to share with you and sum up some of the really tangible action pieces that came from this conversation with Lynn. First of all, the important part that comes to mind is how to make a decision about whether a gap year is the right thing for you. And it's really important to keep in perspective three separate things when you're looking at making this decision. Number one, thinking about what is to be gained by taking a gap year. So, what are the advantages? What is going to be sacrificed by taking a gap year? So, what are some of the cons or disadvantages? But then go back and look at that con list, because I will bet you a lot of those things will actually shift into column 3 as I propose it now. What is actually going to be delayed? So you're not actually sacrificing it. It's just a temporary putting on pause of something that you will experience the following year. So just think about that. So what is to be gained? What will be sacrificed? Or what will just be delayed or postponed? The second tip that I want to leave you with is definitely do your research. Get out there and spend some time to really find out what's available and what is possible. So check out our website for all of our information events. We'll link to them in the show notes. Those are in-person events or online events. We also have gap year planning workshops. So if you did want to come and get some hands-on time with one of our experts, that is a great way to do it. Actionable piece number 3 is that deferrals are a great opportunity if you know what you want to be doing the following year. And to defer your acceptance a year is an incredible opportunity and one to definitely look into. Now, as was mentioned in the podcast, this is not a straightforward process. There's not a single link that you can click and it just magically gets done. A lot of universities have this happening on a case-by-case basis, which means you do need to advocate for yourself. You do need to do a little bit of searching and finding out who the right person is within the institution to help you get that approval. So definitely check in and look into what that might look like. And my last tip is what Lynn was talking about being bold. You know your kid best, so you will come up against some people who are resistant to the way that you are approaching your child's after graduation time. But definitely just take solace in the fact that you know your kid better than anyone and you are making the decision that is the best thing for you. And you need to be able to be confident in that and make sure that you are confident knowing that you have made the right decision for your kid. And with that, We're going to wrap up this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and we can't wait to share our next set of stories with you. So stay tuned, and until next time, keep on adventuring.